The sky was gray, and a light rain fell as people gathered at the cemetery. A soft violin played in the background, its notes blending with the sound of raindrops on umbrellas. Mr. Edward Blake stood silently beside a black coffin. He was a tall man in his early 50s, dressed in a dark suit. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were red from sleepless nights. Inside the coffin lay his only son, Daniel Blake, just 17 years old. Daniel had died in a car accident a few days earlier. The news had shocked everyone. Daniel was young, smart, and full of life. People whispered among themselves, sharing memories of Daniel. Some cried softly. Reporters stood at a distance taking photos and notes. But Mr. Blake heard none of it. He stared at the coffin, his mind blank. He had built a business empire, owned mansions, and had everything money could buy. But now he felt empty. As the ceremony continued, Mr. Blake stepped forward to say his final goodbye. He placed a white rose on the coffin and whispered, "I'm sorry, son." Suddenly he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw a young boy around 10 years old. The boy was barefoot, wearing dirty clothes, and his face was smudged with dirt. The boy looked up at Mr. Blake and whispered, "He's not dead." "Sir," Mr. Blake's heart skipped a beat. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling. But the boy didn't answer. He turned and ran away, disappearing into the crowd. Mr. Blake stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Who was that boy? How did he get here? And what did he mean by "he's not dead"? He looked around, but the boy was gone. The rest of the funeral passed in a blur. Mr. Blake couldn't stop thinking about the boy's words. That night, he couldn't sleep. The boy's face and voice haunted him. The next morning, Mr. Blake decided to find the boy. He asked the funeral staff if they had seen him, but no one had. He checked the security cameras, but the footage was unclear. Days passed, and Mr. Blake became obsessed. He posted flyers with the boy's description, offering a reward. For information, he visited shelters and soup kitchens asking if anyone had seen the boy, but no one had. Then one evening, as Mr. Blake was leaving a shelter, he saw a familiar figure in the alley. It was the boy. "Wait," Mr. Blake called out. The boy turned, his eyes wide with fear. "I just want to talk," Mr. Blake said gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded. They sat on a nearby bench. "What's your name?" Mr. Blake asked. "Liam," the boy replied. "Liam, what did you mean at the funeral?" Liam looked down. "I saw Daniel after the accident. He was alive. He told me not to tell anyone." Mr. Blake's eyes widened. "Where is he now?" "Don't know," Liam said. "He gave me some money and told me to stay quiet." Mr. Blake felt a mix of hope and confusion. Could his son really be alive? He looked at Liam. "Thank you for telling me." Liam nodded and stood up. "I have to go." As Liam walked away, Mr. Blake knew his life had just changed. He had to find his son. The next morning, Edward Blake sat at the edge of his bed, still dressed in last night's clothes. His eyes were tired, his hands shaky. He had barely slept. The words of that homeless boy, "He's not dead, sir," echoed over and over in his mind. Could it be true? Was his son still alive? Edward had built his entire life on facts, business, and logic. He didn't believe in fairy tales. But something about Liam's eyes, the way he had whispered those words, it felt real. He couldn't ignore it anymore. That day, Edward visited the police station. He requested full access to Daniel's accident report. As he flipped through the file, something struck him. The body had been badly burned, and identification was done through Daniel's wallet and personal items, not through DNA. "Is there any chance this wasn't my son?" he asked the officer. The officer shook his head. "We had no reason to doubt the identity, Mr. Blake. The car was registered under your name, and the boy had your son's wallet." Edward left with a heavy heart. It wasn't enough. He needed more. Later that evening, Edward returned to the street where he had first seen Liam. He walked through dark alleys, past broken buildings, asking anyone he could find. Most people shook their heads or ignored him, but one elderly homeless woman wrapped in a torn blanket looked up and said, You're the rich man from the papers, aren't you? Edward nodded. I saw your son, she said, eyes sharp. The night of the crash, he climbed out of the car, hurt, but alive. He limped away, scared. Edward's heart pounded. Are you sure? He asked. I may be poor, sir, she said, but I know what I saw. He gave her some money and wrote down every detail she could recall. Her description matched Daniel. Tall, thin, short brown hair, wearing a black jacket. It couldn't be coincidence. Edward went home, pulled out old photos of Daniel, and compared them to everything Liam and the woman had said. Something wasn't right about the funeral. The next morning, Edward hired a private investigator. I want to know everything, he told him. Recheck the body, the crash, witnesses, everything. The investigator nodded. I'll start today. Meanwhile, Edward returned to the shelter. He needed to find Liam again. Days passed. Then, one rainy evening, as Edward sat in his car, outside a food kitchen, he saw a small figure step out from the shadows. It was Liam. Edward jumped out of the car. Liam! The boy froze, but this time, he didn't run. I'm not here to hurt you, Edward said softly. I just need to know the truth, please. Liam looked down at his feet. I already told you Daniel's not dead. Where did you see him last? Liam hesitated. Behind the old train station. There's a place under the bridge. He was hiding there. Edward pulled out a photo of Daniel. Is this him? Liam nodded. Yes, but he looked scared. He said someone was after him. He said not to trust anyone. Edward's breath caught. Did he say why? No, Liam replied. He gave me some food and money and told me to run if anyone came asking. Edward looked up at the dark sky. His son was alive, but he was running from something. Or someone. And now Edward knew. He wasn't just trying to find Daniel. He was trying to save him. The sky was dark when Edward Blake arrived at the old train station. He parked his car quietly and looked around. The place was abandoned, rusted, metal, broken windows and empty silence. Just as Liam had said, Edward walked under the bridge with only a flashlight in his hand. He wasn't used to places like this. It smelled of smoke, damp clothes, and forgotten lives. But his heart was filled with something stronger than fear, hope. As he reached the back of the bridge, he found old blankets, empty cans, and signs that someone had been living there. A worn-out backpack rested in the corner. Edward opened it carefully. Inside was something that made his hands tremble. A photograph of him and Daniel, taken on Daniel's 10th birthday. It was torn and faded, but real. Tears welled up in Edward's eyes. This wasn't a lie. His son had been here. He sat down on the cold ground, holding the picture. Where are you, Daniel? He whispered. Suddenly, a soft noise came from behind him. Edward turned quickly, but it wasn't Daniel. It was Liam. I told you he was here, the boy said, sitting beside him. Edward looked at him. Do you know why he ran away? What happened? The night of the accident? Liam nodded slowly. There were 2 men with him that night, he said. They were yelling. I was nearby, picking cans for money. I saw everything. Edward's face tightened. Go on. They crashed the car on purpose, Liam said. Then they pulled Daniel out before it caught fire. They put his things in the car and left his phone there. Then they told him to run and said it was the only way to stay alive. Edward was shocked. Who were these men? I don't know, Liam said. But Daniel was scared. He said he'd seen something. He wasn't supposed to. Something dangerous. Edward's head began to spin. Could this be connected to his company? A deal gone wrong. Was someone trying to use his son as leverage? He stood up quickly. We have to find him, before it's too late. Liam pointed to a narrow alley. There's an old friend of his, a boy named Josh. He might know where Daniel went. Without wasting time, Edward and Liam set out. The streets were dark and wet. Most people ignored them, thinking they were just a lost man and a homeless boy. Finally, they reached a tiny shop at the end of a dirty street. It was closed, but light flickered inside. Edward knocked. After a moment, a teenage boy opened the door, his eyes cautious. "Josh?" Edward asked. The boy froze. "I'm Daniel's father." Josh stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "I haven't seen him in days," he said, lowering his voice. "But he contacted me. He said he's trying to expose something big. Something that could get him killed." Edward's chest tightened. "He told me not to trust the police, not even his friends. He said they're watching." Josh handed Edward a small envelope. "He left this for you." Edward opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive and a short note in Daniel's handwriting. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means you didn't believe I was dead. I'm sorry I left, but I had no choice. They want me gone. I'm trying to stop them, but I need time. Please don't trust anyone yet. I love you." Edward held the letter tightly. His son was alive, in danger, and fighting something bigger than either of them could imagine. He looked at Josh and Liam. "We're going to bring him back," he said, his voice firm. "But first, I need to know what's on this drive." Edward Blake sat in his dark study, the only light coming from the glow of his laptop screen. In front of him was the small USB drive that Daniel had left behind, the only clue to what had really happened. He took a deep breath and plugged it in. The drive opened with a folder titled Truth. Inside were several video clips, documents, and one text file named Read This First. He clicked it. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means you're still looking for me. I wish I could tell you everything in person, but it's too dangerous. What you'll see on this drive will change everything. Please don't stop until the truth comes out. Love, Daniel." Edward's heart pounded. He opened the first video clip. It was grainy, taken from a phone, but what it showed was clear. Two men in suits, arguing, threatening someone, and then the camera turned slightly, revealing Daniel's frightened face, hiding behind a wall, recording. Edward leaned forward. The men were talking about secret deals, illegal money transfers, using Edward's company name to launder funds through a fake project. Edward froze. These men were his business partners, trusted for years. One of them said, "If Blake's son finds out, we're finished. We need to get rid of him before he talks." Edward paused the video. His hands were shaking. This was why Daniel had disappeared. He wasn't running from the accident. He was running from murderers. Edward opened more files, documents, spreadsheets, emails, all showing how his company was being used behind his back. The fraud was massive, and if this ever got out, people would lose everything. He leaned back, feeling sick. How had he missed all of this? While he was building his empire, was his son fighting alone? A knock broke the silence. It was Liam holding a cup of tea with both hands. "Are you okay, sir?" Edward nodded slowly. "Liam, thank you for helping me. You've done more for my son than anyone." The boy looked down shyly. "Daniel helped me once, when no one else did." Edward sat quietly for a moment. "He's good kid." Liam smiled. "He's more than that. He's brave." Suddenly, Edward's phone buzzed. It was the private investigator he had hired. "I found something," the voice said. "There's movement on Daniel's old email. Someone's using it from a warehouse downtown." Edward stood up. "Send me the address." He closed the laptop and looked at Liam. "We may be closer than we thought." Within minutes, Edward and Liam were back in the car. The streets were quiet, the city asleep. But Edward's mind was racing. Was Daniel still in that warehouse, or had someone else found him first? As they reached the area, Edward parked the car a few blocks away. He didn't want to draw attention. He and Liam walked slowly, hiding in the shadows. The warehouse was large and broken down, with no lights and a rusted gate. They slipped inside, through a side door. The inside was dark and dusty. Stacks of old crates stood like silent guards. Edward moved quietly, flashlight in hand. Then, a faint sound. A cough. He froze and turned toward the noise. "Daniel?" he called out, barely a whisper. No answer. He stepped further, and then, from the shadows, someone grabbed him from behind. Edward's heart jumped. The cold grip around his arm tightened. He turned quickly, ready to fight, but froze. It wasn't a stranger, it was Daniel. Pale, thin, a little bruised, but alive. "Dad?" Daniel whispered, almost in disbelief. Edward couldn't speak for a second. His eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, is it really you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You came." They hugged tightly, the silence around them, filled with emotion that words couldn't express. Liam stood a few steps back, watching quietly, a soft smile on his face. He had never seen something so real before. "I thought you were dead," Edward whispered, holding Daniel's face in, his hands. "Everyone thought you were gone." Daniel looked down. "That was the plan. I had to disappear. Those men, they wanted me dead." Edward looked around the dark warehouse. "How long have you been hiding here?" "Since the night of the accident," Daniel said. "I escaped before the car exploded. They planted everything to make it look like I died." He looked at Liam and smiled faintly. "This boy, he helped me when I had no one." "I know," Edward said, nodding. "He's brave, like you." Daniel grew serious. "Dad, they're still watching you. They think you don't know anything. That's the only reason you're still safe." Edward took Daniel's hand. "I saw the videos, the documents. You were right to run. But you don't have to hide anymore. We're going to end this." Daniel's face showed both relief and fear. "How? They control everything, even some people in the police. If we go to the wrong person," Edward interrupted him gently, "then we go to the right one. I know someone from the FBI, someone I can trust. We'll take the evidence straight to him." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the warehouse. They all froze. Voices, low, sharp, getting closer. "They're here," Daniel whispered, eyes wide. "They found me." Edward grabbed Liam's hand and pulled Daniel behind him. They hid behind a stack of crates, staying low. Two men entered, the same ones from the video. One of them spoke. "The boss says we finish this tonight. No more running." Daniel clenched his fists. "That's them." Liam looked scared, but Edward gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay calm." He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to the FBI contact. Then he pressed send. The men walked deeper into the warehouse. One held a flashlight. "He was using the email again. He's nearby. Search everywhere." Edward knew they didn't have much time. The back door was still open. They just needed to get there, quietly. He whispered, "When I say run, we go. Liam, stay close to Daniel." They nodded. The men turned away for a moment. "Now, run." Edward whispered harshly. They sprinted through the crates, keeping low. The door was just a few meters away. But then, a loud shout. "There they are!" The chase began. Bullets echoed behind them. Daniel grabbed Liam's hand, pushing him ahead. Edward shielded them with his body. They burst out of the warehouse into the night. Just then, sirens, flashing lights, police cars, FBI agents. The two men froze as agents surrounded them. "Drop your weapons," someone shouted. The men hesitated, then dropped their guns. They were handcuffed within seconds. Edward fell to his knees, breathing hard. Daniel hugged Liam tightly. An FBI agent walked over to Edward. "We got your message. Good thing you reached out." Edward nodded, pointing to Daniel. He risked everything. He saved lives. Daniel handed the USB to the agent. "This has everything you need," the agent nodded. "We'll make sure they pay." Edward looked at his son, safe, alive, brave, and for the first time in years he smiled with his whole heart. But deep inside, he knew. For the first time in weeks, Edward Blake felt the warmth of the sun on his face and peace in his heart. Daniel was safe. The criminals had been arrested. The evidence Daniel collected was now in the hands of the FBI. Edward's name was cleared, and his company was no longer under threat. But the damage, especially to his heart, would take time to heal. He sat on a bench in a quiet park, watching Daniel and Liam play with a soccer ball near the trees. They laughed like normal boys, like nothing had happened. Edward smiled, but the pain was still there, deep inside. A news van passed by slowly, then another. The media had been everywhere since the story broke. Millionaire's son found. Alive after faking death. Secret crime ring exposed. It sounded like a movie, but it was real. Too real. Daniel sat beside his father, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They want me to speak on the news," he said quietly. "You don't have to," Edward replied gently. "Only if you're ready." Daniel looked down. "I want to, not for me, but for kids like Liam, for people who don't have a voice." Edward nodded with pride. "That's very brave." Daniel smiled. "I get that from Mom." They both fell, silent. The mention of her name made Edward's eyes cloud over. Daniel's mother had passed away years ago. Losing her had created a wall between father and son, a wall that only now had started to fall. "I'm sorry, Dad," Daniel said softly. "For running, for not trusting you." Edward placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, I'm sorry. I was so busy building my empire, I forgot to be your father." Their eyes met, and in that moment more healing happened than any words could explain. Liam jogged over, holding a melting ice cream cone. "Guess what?" he said excitedly. "The officer said I can stay at the shelter for now, but after that, maybe I can stay with you." He looked shyly at Edward, unsure of what he would say. Edward looked at the boy with kind eyes. "Liam, you saved my son's life. You're family now." Liam's eyes sparkled, and Daniel hugged him tightly. The three of them stood there, an unlikely family brought together by pain, danger, and courage. Later that night at a live press conference, Daniel stood in front of cameras. His voice was clear, strong, but filled with emotion. "There are kids out there who see things they shouldn't, who get caught in the middle of rich men's lies. I was lucky. I had someone to help me. But not everyone is lucky. So today, I'm not just standing here as a millionaire's son. I'm standing here for every forgotten child, for Liam, for the truth." The audience applauded. Edward, watching from the side, wiped away a tear. That night as they drove home, Daniel looked out the window. "Do you think everything will go back to normal now?" he asked. Edward shook his head gently. "No, son. But maybe, just maybe, we can build something better." Daniel nodded. "I'd like that." Weeks had passed since the night at the warehouse. The headlines had faded. The criminals were behind bars. And Edward Blake's company was rebuilding, this time with full honesty and transparency. But something much more important had changed. Edward Blake had changed. He was no longer just a businessman. He was now a father, present, warm, and learning every day how to love without conditions. In a cozy new home outside the city, Edward, Daniel, and Liam were settling into a new life. Daniel had gone back to school, where he was welcomed with open arms. His story had inspired students, teachers, and even strangers across the country. He had become a symbol of courage, not because he was rich, but because he had stood up for the truth. Liam, now officially adopted by Edward, was finally living the life he had only dreamed of. Warm meals, clean clothes, and a bed to call his own. But most importantly, a family. Every evening they had dinner together at the same table, something Edward hadn't done in years. "Did you know," Liam said one evening, "that I used to sleep under a broken bus stop?" Edward looked at him sadly. "And now," Liam grinned, "now I have my own room. And 2 brothers." Daniel laughed. "Don't get too comfortable. You still snore." They all laughed together, the sound echoing through the quiet house. But Edward wasn't finished. He had used his resources to start something new, the Blake Foundation for Street Kids, providing shelter, education, and protection for homeless children across the country. And Daniel was part of it too. He gave speeches in schools. He told his story. He listened to other children who had no one. And Liam, now confident and full of life, stood beside him, offering hope to those still stuck in darkness. One afternoon, they visited a shelter built from Edward's funding. A little girl, barefoot and shy, tugged at Liam's sleeve. "Are you the boy from the news?" Liam nodded gently. Yes, but more importantly, I'm someone who believes you matter. She smiled, a small, precious smile. That evening, Daniel stood before a crowd at the shelter's opening. This place is not just walls and beds. It's a second chance. A chance I got because someone believed in me when I was lost. And now I promise to be that someone for every child still out there, waiting, crying, hiding. You are not alone. Not anymore. The audience rose in applause. Edward stood in the back, his heart full. He looked up at the sky. I hope you're watching, he whispered to Daniel's mother. Our boy made it, and he's changing the world. As the sun set behind them, the three of them, Edward, Daniel, and Liam, stood hand in hand. 3 broken lives, now healed. 3 lost souls now found. And a story that began with death but ended with hope.